So, hey, welcome back. So, I hope you guys are able to hear me. Yes? No? Yes. Okay. Cool. I got. So today the first talk was pretty good. Thank you, Sunny. It was really very informative session, and we learned a lot of cool tips on Chrome debugging tool. And I just connected with other people also, and the during our launch in different tables, and all has a very good feedback, Sunny. So it was pretty good. So we'll move to our next topic, Abhas. So Abhas will be talking about how we can read the ECMA script specifications better. Over to you, Abhas.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's visible now.
Yes, it is to me. Yes, I can see a couple of yes also.
Yeah, sure. Hi. Hey, hi everyone. So I wanted to talk about how to read the ECMA script specification. So you might think like, what is this ECMA script specification, right? So I think like the easiest way to introduce that is to like look at what we write in our resumes, right? So all of us write like ES5, ES6, right? You know this version of JavaScript. And what does that ES6 mean? So ES6 is basically just ECMAScript 6. Okay, so ECMAScript is like like there is a specification, so it's a document which describes how the language JavaScript is supposed to work. And what we mean by ECMAScript 6 is that the version of this document which was frozen at the start of 2016, so whatever was the version right then, that is called usually as ECMAScript 6, right? So but why do we like even need something like a specification, right? Why can't we just write JavaScript? So let's say we look at an example like this. So this is a very easy example, if else. We all know how it works. So if your condition is true, it goes into this part. If it is false, it goes into this part. But what happens when we put a empty array in the condition, right? So someone might say that an empty array is true, right? Because it looks something like a empty object. But someone else might say that, hey, a empty object should be false because it is a empty array, right? It doesn't contain anything. Now how do we decide these things, right? There are so many implementations of JavaScript. So if you look at Chrome browser, Firefox, maybe Opera, or even some JavaScript implementations are on microcontrollers. So they all might have like different implementations of JavaScript. So unless there is a common body, a common place where all these details are defined, right? Things like what will happen if if you provide an empty array in a if, right? Will it be true or false? So unless you have this common definition, then everyone might end up implementing it slightly differently, right? In fact, if you remember, there when the web sort of started, there used to be something called a browser wire. So like different browsers used to implement different features slightly differently, and it used to be like a big pain for the web developers, because now it will be very hard to write this code which works everywhere, right? So that's what you want to do. So that's why uh, there is this body called ECMA International, right? So they maintain a lot of standards. Now what happened is this JavaScript also now has a common definition. So all the implementations of JavaScript in like all browsers and everything, they'll follow a common specification, right? A common definition of JavaScript, which is called as this ECMAScript language specification. And every year, like at the start of the year or around the start of the year, they freeze that version of the specification and call it like ECMAScript 2015 or 2016, something like that, right? So hopefully now we kind of understand why you need like a common definition. And if you have a common definition, right, it has to be very rigid. You have to exactly tell how all the things are going to work, because now all of these browsers are going to implement that same logic, right? So if it is little bit ambiguous, then you might have different behavior. So that is why the specification it tries to tell you everything in very good details, so that everyone ends up with the same behavior. Now who creates this ECMAScript thing, right? Who are the people writing or maintaining it? So there is this body of people, right? A group of people called TC39. Okay, so it's not like 39 members or anything, but there are representative from various places. So there will be like people from Google Chrome team, Mozilla Firefox team, right, IE team, and even some representative from big companies like again Mozilla, Apple, Microsoft, Google. So all of them have their representative, and these people look at whatever suggestions they get, new features that you want to add to the language, or they look at if the existing specification is correct. If it is a little bit problematic, then they try to fix it, right? And all of that goes through basically some proposals. So you might have heard of these things, right? That we have this optional chaining nowadays in JavaScript, right? So these things, they go through a proposal stage. So let's say you have like a some interesting idea you want to implement. I don't know, you want to implement some feature that you find in Python, right? Maybe JavaScript doesn't have that. So you'll basically start a proposal going to this GitHub repository that they have, right? And when it starts, it's like at stage one, where it's basically just an idea. And then slowly, when it is validated more and more, and then browsers start to implement it, then it slowly goes to like stage 1 to 4. And then finally, it becomes like part of the specification, right? So till now we have been talking a lot about the specification, but what is it, right? So basically, it's not it's like it's just a HTML page, okay? It's just a big HTML page which says how all the things work, right? And the one thing that people ask is that why do we need to read the specification, right? I mean, we have the MDN documentation, we have all these great books. So like I really like this You Don't Know JS by Kyle Simpson, right? So a lot of you might have read it. And the thing is that when you're reading this book, right, sometimes you might think that where do these people get their information from, right? So where is Kyle understanding all these things from so that he can explain it so well to other people, right? How can he be sure that he's covering all the things, or he's telling the right thing? Or let's say when you read this detailed Stack Overflow answer, you might think like, I mean, I understand this thing in very good details, right? But if I want to understand one another thing, right, one more thing in JavaScript, how do I get so much details about it, right? So that's the secret sauce. Basically, whenever you read a good book or MDN documentation, those people are reading the specification, sort of simplifying it, and presenting it to our audience, right? So that we can sort of understand easily what is happening, right? And another thing where I have found this a little bit useful is that sometimes we have some discussion with, let's say, our colleagues, or some discussion on LinkedIn, right? Let's say someone says that we should use arrow functions, and maybe someone says that no, we should not use arrow function because it is like heavy, or it is not very useful compared to, let's say, normal function. Or someone might say that okay, I used to use bound functions earlier in React, right? Why should I move to arrow functions? Maybe arrow function and bound function is the same thing, right? So like more often than not, we tend to go into these internal discussions, right? Everybody tries to guess what is happening internally, but then the discussion doesn't go anywhere, right? Because you don't exactly know what is happening internally. You can only try to guess and look at examples, or maybe look at a good blog post, right? But what if we had a way to look at the actual document and understand it for ourselves? So that is what I'm going to try to do, to show you people that how to read some simple things from the specification, and relate it to the code that we are writing. Okay, so like how do you get this specification thing, right? I mean, the easiest way is, right, you can find anything on MDN, right? So we'll start with, let's say, if else. How does if else work? So I go to this MDN page, I can see this whole thing, and at the end, like towards the end of the MDN page, you'll find this section called specifications, right? So they say like, it says ECMAScript ECMA 262. So like ECMA 262 is the official name of this specification. So you can basically click on this to go to the specification document, and like that part of the document. So let me just like show you how the specification document looks like. Okay, so actually go to the top. So basically this is how it looks. Like this is a URL, we can share this later on, right? But this is how it looks. It's just a big HTML document. Okay, it's huge, but I mean, it's nothing like it's not like a machine readable thing. It's something you can read yourself. Okay, so the whole thing is sort of written in plain English. It uh, it's not like written in some language or anything. So some people like to read, let's say, the source code of how, let's say, V8 is implemented, right? That will be written in some kind of a language, C or C++, something like that. But this is basically a human readable document. Okay, So what I'll try to do is I'll try to look at how this if else is defined in the specification. And in the left, you'll be basically able to see what, like, how it is defined in the specification. On the right, what we'll do is we'll try to write, like we'll try to see how the code should look. Okay, because this thing might be like little bit theoretical, so you want to see how that thing looks like when you are writing it. Okay, so when you are looking for something, let's say you find the part where this is defined. So first thing is you have to find where this is defined, because this is a huge document, right? So the easiest way, like I said, you can go to MDN. They have a specification link for every topic. You can click that and it will load like that specific part. Okay, so let's say somehow we have found this part where if else is defined, right? Now first you have to start with the syntax. Now you might think, right, I know how a if else looks, right? So I'll start with writing some code, right? So if something, right, it might be a condition or anything. This is how we normally write a if else. You put some console log here and some other console log in the else, let's say, right? This is how we normally know how to write a if else statement. But you might wonder, right, what other forms are there for the if else, right? I mean, how else can I write a if else statement? So that's why you have this syntax part on the left, if you can see, right? So you have this syntax which defines what all things it's valid to write in a if else. So for example, right, it says that, so this whole thing, right, this section, this is basically what is taught in computer science as like a BNF grammar. But for our case, it's like you don't have to think of like it as a very complicated thing. It is basically saying that, okay, I am defining what is a if statement, right, so that I can use it in other places. And it says that it has these two forms. Okay, it can be either like this one or else like this one. Okay, so it says in one form, let's say this is how we write, right? If some expression, then you write a statement, and then else, and then you write another statement. So this is one form. What is the other form? That is just a simpler one. So it will just contain the if part. So if any expression, then you write a statement, right? Now you might think, right, we all know what a statement is, but do we know, I mean, what are the other possibilities of a statement? So for example, let's click on this. So all of these are hyperlinked. Okay, so you want to see what is a statement, let's say, because you don't want to use your intuition right now, you want to see what the specification tells you. So you click on the statement part, and it says, now see, it will have all these lines, right? But that means is that these are the various like kinds of statement. Okay, so basically, if I can rewrite this thing, right, statement is just like a single line sort of, right? So this is the basic form of a if statement. I can do I can do a console log hello, right? And this will be like writing a single statement here. Okay, so this is a basic form. What we use instead is called a block statement. So what we do is here we can write multiple lines, right? Not just one line. You can put like multiple lines here. So that is called a block statement. But how is it defined in the specification? If you look at this, it says that statement, one option of statement is a block statement. So if I go into that, it says, sorry, yeah, it says that block statement is a block, which is like you have a curly brace at the start. See, that's exactly what you're doing. You have a curly brace at the start, and then you have a statement list. So you basically have like multiple statements here, and then you again have the closing brace. So that's exactly how this is whole thing is defined in the specification, right? But okay, we told that statement can be a lot of things, right? It says something interesting here. It can be an empty statement. So what is an empty statement? If I scroll, see, empty statement is basically just one semicolon. Okay, what does that mean? So in my if else, now I can go and write this. This is a valid if statement. Okay, I can even write else after this. I don't necessarily have to introduce a block scope here. I can just write a semicolon, and then I can even write the whole block scope here, right? Saying that this will be like false. So this is a valid if else statement, even though we don't use this kind of thing normally. But this gives you idea of like how this like what all the possible syntaxes you can use basically. And sometimes they will have different meanings. So you might want to use this case, maybe if you don't want to write something in if, right, you just want to only consider the else case. Although yeah, ideally you'll probably put like a not symbol here so that you can write it in then part, but this is also a valid thing. Cool. So at least we probably learned a little bit, right? That if statement can look differently. Now this is just a syntax. This is like normally not something that you are going to be very concerned about, right? You kind of know what these things look. But why is this syntax important? What you want to look at is how this syntax is going to run, right? So if you actually start scrolling, I want to ignore some of the sections here, okay? So whenever you see like static semantics, those are basically, let's just say, not so important for now. Like they don't define how this thing is going to run exactly, but it says, let's say, early errors. So it will tell you like what all will cause, a static error in this case. What actually I want to do, I want to scroll till I find the runtime semantics, if you notice here, right? So for everything you'll first have the syntax and then the runtime semantics, okay? In fact, I just want to show in the table of content. Like if you look at the contents on the left, right, you can, whenever you see these things, right, you see it's a lot of ss. So that is static semantics. Most of the time we want to kind of ignore that and go to this rs, so runtime semantics. It says like evaluation, right? So you have to think of this in a little bit abstract way, right? You have to think of how the browser is going to run your if else statement. Okay, so what does it do? So see, that two expression, like two syntaxes we saw there, right? Here also it is divided into two parts. So it is basically saying that if it is this syntax, then follow this logic. If it is the other syntax, then follow this logic. Okay, now what is the past part? So it is saying that if expression, right, we know that in the expression part you can either write like a boolean thing, you can just write true false or something that returns you true false, but you can also write something else, right? I can just write a string hello here. So how will that be how will that be used, right? So it says that basically first evaluate the expression. That means basically take this part of the code, whatever is there, and sort of eval it, right? Evaluate it and get what is the value of that thing. So here you have this expression reference, that represent the value that we got from this condition. Okay, so this might be again true false or anything else. It can be just a string array, anything, right? Then what it says is get value of expression reference. So like think of it as a little bit abstract thing. So this expression reference is sort of not the exact value. This is not like true or false, right? This is more like a wrapper from where you can get the value which gives you the actual value, right? And then what does it say? It says two boolean of that, right? Because we want to finally get to true or false, so it uses this thing called two boolean. Now what is this two boolean, right? This is not a JavaScript method, right? We don't see something like that in JavaScript. So these are basically some abstract methods which are internal to the specification. Like this is not something you have available in JavaScript. This is just for defining the behavior. Okay, this is just an internal thing. Okay, so let's click on two boolean and see what will happen. Let's say we have a string like this, or maybe we can even have like a empty array. So I want to find out according to the specification whether this will become true or whether this will become false, right? So here we have this nice table, right? It basically says that if this is the input I got, this will be the result of this thing, right? So some of these are expected, like undefined, null, all of them become false. But now if I go to string, right? So it says that if the argument is an empty string, that is its length is 0, then return false, otherwise return true. So basically if I have a hello, that will become true. But if I have an empty string, that will become false, right? And do we have a same thing for array? Okay, no. So this is like a table, right? Where you can basically understand what becomes true, what becomes false. Great. So we have now some idea that, let's say, this will give us a false thing, right? Now we have two part, our then and else. What will happen to them? Now if we notice a one small thing here, actually we'll talk about in after some time. You see that it has this question mark and this exclamation thing here, right? So it's not like the question mark or exclamation in JavaScript. Okay, this is again an internal representation. What this basically means is that, let's say you have a question mark and then get value of something. What it means is that this get value can sort of throw a error. Okay, What this means is this part, this get value of something, this can cause you a error. This can be a, basically it can be like a break statement that you have written. It might be a return statement that you have written, but it can be basically something which, uh, basically, yeah, which causes a problem, right? Which might cause your if statement to stop and go out of it, right? But in the two boolean, you can see that it's always an exclamation mark. So what exclamation mark means is that this function that you are calling, let's say two boolean, that will never give us a error. Like, because we looked at two boolean, right? We looked at the definition. We see that in every case, whatever you throw at this two boolean, right, it's always going to give you true or false. So, like, doesn't matter. So when, basically when you are looking at this statement, what this basically means is that the definition of two boolean is not changing here, but this is just to give you an idea that this will never throw an error, so you don't need to handle it here. Okay, so we'll look at this in the end. This is also basically called as a completion record. Okay, anyway, so now we know that if the value is true, then evaluate the first statement, right? So if you notice here, the first statement is of course our if part. So if I have console log true here, and if this thing turns to true, then these statements will get executed, right? So technically this is the whole statement. Basically this will get executed. And similarly, if the expression value is not true, like else, then evaluate the second statement. So evaluate the else part, right? So this is understandable. And finally, what does it do? See, it says completion and say returns some odd kind of a thing, right? So you might want to look at like what is a completion. Okay, what is a completion record? So let's look at some expression. Okay, something simple. Let's say 1 plus 1, right? So this is simple. We What do we think of it? Like, this is something which gives you the value 2, right? So that is what completion record indicates. Okay, so this is again not something available to JavaScript. This is an internal definition. So completion record is like a internal, let's just say, object, right? It says that this object has this sort of keys, you might think, right? It has this type and value. So when you have this normal expression, let's say 1 plus 1, this will return you a completion record of, let's say, type normal. Okay, so this means that everything was fine. I just got a nice good value, and you don't need to worry about some problem in this case, right? And the value will basically contain your value. So in this case, this expression becomes 2, right? So the value will be 2. So whenever some other code is handling a completion record, it can basically check the type, see if it is normal, then it can continue just like, move to the next step. But if it is one of the other values, then it needs to usually handle that in a special way. So for example, if you use a return statement, right? If you have a function, or somewhere inside your code you use a return statement, then what will happen is, let's say if you use a return statement within a if else, right? Now the if else needs to stop its own logic and return to the above thing, right? Return to the parent thing, so that it finally returns, finally goes to the function. So that's why you have this kind of completion records. So all these things other than a normal completion, they're called that as abrupt completions records. Okay, so anyway, you have a type and a value. Value is whatever usually the value you return, and type will be normal or one of the abrupt completions. Okay, uh so I know this is like getting maybe like yeah, it might be getting a little bit detailed, so I just want to hear from people, like, is it still understandable or this is getting complicated? Like, if you basically write that on the chat, I can see it. Okay, okay, cool, cool.
Yeah,
So
so if anyone has any question, they can raise their hand so that they will get an opportunity. They can directly talk and ask, and or you can ask a question on question time.
okay, so okay, cool. So let's say we understand how this thing works, right? um, if else. So one thing is like that you said, if else is normally how you expect it, and then you have this completion record thing. Okay, so now let's look at something a little bit more complicated. Okay, so let's say something like a method call we want to look at. Let's say if I call this foo.bar, right? In within this method, what will be the value of this? Okay, so you know that in this case, if you call a method like this, right, object dot method, then the object is the value of this within this function, right? But where do we see that? How can you find that in the specification? How can you see what is the value of this in case of a normal function call? So if I just call a callback, what will be the value of this there, right? So let's try to look at that. Okay, so what I've actually done for this is that, see, it has this table of contents here, right? You can pin any section here. Like I've just kept this bookmark sort of here, and we'll go to the section called function calls. Okay, and in fact, let's say before that, let me give you like a overview of what this table of content means. Okay, uh, okay, can I close this? Okay, so this is like a huge document, right? So the table of content is kind of important, which part contains what thing. Okay, so let me point it out. So this top part, right, notational conventions, that will basically tell you how to read the specification. Like we saw these kind of symbols, right, question mark, exclamation, or all these things. So it will tell you how to read these things, right, how to read this structure. Next part is data type and value and some abstract operations. So this will talk you, this will tell you in general about what is a number type, what is a begin type, what is a string, and some abstract operation like we did to boolean, right? So those things will be defined here. Okay, and this part, around this part, so here it will talk about all kind of expression and statements. Like we said, right, if is a kind of statement, so that will be defined here, right? Maybe you have like a conditional operator or something like that, so that will be like a expression. So those things will be defined around here, around the mid section. But sometimes you just want to look at like how does object.assign work, right? Or how does array.push work? Like these public methods that we use in JavaScript, where are those defined? So those are usually not defined in the above section. Those are around this, like towards the end of the section. Okay, so this will tell you like in here, let's say you have text processing, so that will talk about the string methods. Here you have something around objects, right? So this will talk about how does object.assign work. So a lot of times you will actually want to just look at these public methods because those are the ones that we use like most of the time. Okay, cool. So for now we want to look at how a function call works. Okay, so I'll go to this section. I've just bookmarked it for now, right? So it says function calls. Now this looks kind of serious, right? So like gives you a lot of things, right? So let me simplify it sort of. So okay, so if you have something like this, right, you are calling some function, so that is what is the call expression here. Okay, so that is the expression. This is like called a call expression because you are literally calling some function. Okay, now a lot of these things I think we can basically skip. So the only important part is this. So it says func equal to get value of ref. Okay, so basically if you have like a foo definition, right, let's just say foo is like a normal function, or maybe it can be array function also. Let's say it has this definition, right? So what this means is this func is basically having your reference to your function. Okay, that is what your func is. And the next thing we want to look at is ref. So I'm just highlighting wherever this is being used, right? So this ref is your this syntax. So whatever thing you are calling, right, if you are calling a foo, it just has this thing called something like, there is no base, but there is this value foo. But if I'm calling something like foo.bar, then this reference will say something like it has a base which is foo, and then it has a value within it which is it's trying to access, and that is bar, right? So these are the two main important things. The reference gives you that what you are trying to call as a syntax, and this func gives you the what is the actual value you are trying to call. So the value will be the function, and this reference will be this syntax. Okay, and what you basically want to do is at the end, right, notice this is a lot of setup code. You can kind of ignore it, right? If I have to still cover it, that's basically saying that if the function is eval, so if you are evaluating some code, right, then do it in a little bit different way. But in most cases it will actually go to this part. Okay, it will go to this function evaluate call. So like this is just like your normal code, right? How we have our overall function, which basically again calls like another function, right? So it's just like that. So now we go into evaluate call. Okay, so this is where it comes whenever you call any function. And remember, these are the two things we have: function and reference. Function is the function object, reference is the syntax of it. Cool. So what does it say at the first, right? It says that if ref is a reference. Okay, so we can skip that part. It says that if ref is a property reference, right? So you can kind of intuitively understand what is a property reference. It seems like if I have two ways of calling a function, which is like directly or using this object dot method kind of a thing, so this seems like a property reference, right? Because I'm accessing some kind of a property. Now we can of course go into this, go into the definition and see what it says, right? So what does it say? See, this is a definition, nothing much. It says that if the base value is an object or a primitive, then this is a property reference, right? So if you look at it here, if your foo is basically an object or a uh, primitive, right? Primitive meaning it can be just like your string, right? It can be just true or false, anything. If the base is any one of those, then it is a property reference. And you can understand, right? In this case, you don't have a base, so your base is not there, which means this will be false. So this is a property reference, this is not a property reference, right? Cool. So if we now go back, it says if it is a property reference, then this is the most important line. It says this value will be, let me just so it says this value will be get this value of ref. Okay, so it seems like now we are preparing this value which will finally go into my function. Okay, so in case of a property, it says that I should be able to get the this using my reference. So basically in this case, using this syntax, I should be able to get what will be my this value, right? So if I can go into that, okay, so it says that in most cases this will go into this line, get base of this reference, right? So you can if I go into get base, it says that returns the base value component of v. So if I just sum this whole thing up, in this case it basically says that whatever is the base of the property reference, so foo, that is going to be my this value. Okay, so that is what it says, this value equal to foo. But what will happen in this case, right? What will happen for like a normal function call? Let's look at the uh, if part. Sorry, the else part. So see, it says that if it is not a property reference like a normal function call, then this value will be something like reference env dot with base object. Okay, so if you actually go to get base, right, it says again the base value of component of v, right? Sorry, so it will go into this else part as around there. So if case in case of a normal function call, right, it basically says this value will be undefined. So in this case my this value is undefined. Okay, now you might think of something, right? If I just call a function normally, but the value of this within that, so let me actually write this function there, right? So just so that we know what is happening. So it's my function foo looks like just console.log of this. Okay, if this is the case, what will it print, right? So intuitively, if you have actually used it earlier, you might know that this actually sometimes prints window, right? Prints a window object in like a browser, right? But how is that going to happen? Till now what we have figured out is that this value that is going to go in here is undefined, right? So we'll see some other method below which will somehow change this value. Okay, cool. So if you notice how this value is propagating, right, it's finally going into this function. Okay, it's going to this function called call. So let's go into that, and it basically says that it should again go into this other function like dot call, right? Right, so we should be able to search for this thing. Right, now see, why is this thing not hyperlinked, right? This internal call function, why is this not hyperlinked? Because the thing is that everyone has their own call definition. So a normal function like this has its own definition of call, right? if you have a proxy object that has its own definition of call, similarly if you have an arrow function that has a different way of doing a call, right? So that's why it's not hyperlink, because you have like multiple implementations of this. So what you want to do is basically just search for that. Okay, I just want to search for call and see if it is defined somewhere. No. Okay. Okay, anyway, so I can't find it right now. So basically what will happen is, right, if this value is undefined or null, so whether you send it yourself or whether it is, decided by itself, if this value is undefined or null, then internally, in case of a non-strict mode, this gets replaced with window. Okay, so just an interesting thing to try is, take any of your normal function, right, like a function definition like this foo, and do this thing, do foo.call and pass in null. Okay, in case of, sorry, in case of non-strict mode, whether you pass in null or whether you pass in undefined, right, it will always get replaced with window in case of non-strict mode. But in case of strict mode, this will be whatever value you have already sent. Okay, so this is how the value of this is decided within a function or a method call. So in short, in case of function, that this value is window or undefined. So window in case of non-strict mode and undefined in case of strict mode, right? And in case of a method call like this foo.bar, then your this value, right, is foo. So the this here will be the object that you are calling this on, right? um, so yeah, let's say these are the two things. Okay, so let me actually go back to the slide. So I just wanted to like give overall idea of like, how some of the basic things work. So if we have some time, I'm not sure if we have, but like, would you like to suggest something that we should take a quick look at, just to give like idea of how you would go for a random thing, if anyone would like to suggest something. Okay, we have object.assign bound function. I'll go with object.assign. Okay, bound 2 votes. Okay, let's go with bound function. Cool. So let me go back here. Okay, bound. Okay, cool. So that's why I had it bookmarked. I think no, I don't think I have it bookmarked. Okay, let me just search for it. Cool. Yeah. So we reach this part. Okay, so see, it says bound function exotic objects, right? So this is interesting. What is like an exotic object, right? So the thing is, normally all the things that we use, or someone shadow function anyway, so normally all the things that we use are called a ordinary object, right? So they have all the common methods and common utilities that you might expect, right? But the specification says that there are some of the things which are exotic object because they don't have all these kind of same methods. So one of them is the bound function. Okay, so if you look at this, right, can we look at how it is created? So yeah, let's look at this first, right? It says bound function create, which we can kind of guess, right? I have some function here, right? I have my function which just does console.log of this and arguments, let's say, because those are the things I can sort of bind. So I have this and arguments, and what I want to do is I can do like a, right, some bound foo equal to foo dot bind whatever, right? I can pass in something like what will be my custom this value and what will be my arguments that I want to bind, right? So that's when it reaches this function bound function create, right? When you do foo dot bind, and if you look at it, you kind of understand, right? That's the same thing. It says that the thing that it gets as input is the target function, which is of course foo in this case, and then I have a bound this, which is whatever custom this I want to send, and then some bound arguments, right, whatever I pass in. So what does it say? It says that let's create a new object. Okay, It creates a new object which has some make a basic object with some slots, maybe prototype extensible. Anyway, so what we want to do is something like, yeah, we want to look at this section. It says that set these internal slots. Okay, if you look at this thing, so these are not again things accessible to JavaScript but for only internal reference. So it says this sets these three things. It says that my bound target function is this function foo, my bound this is whatever you are sending, and my bound argument is whatever is in the third part, right? So it is basically creating like a special object which has these three things stored, right? And it says that if this thing is called, right, so if this call is getting called basically, then do whatever is defined in this part. So that's what we want to see, right? When you create a bound function, it basically stores these three things: what is the function being called, what is my custom this value, what are my arguments, right? Cool. So now I go into object.call definition. Sorry, in fact, let's go up. Yeah, so this is where it's defined, right? How will call work in this case? So what it says is basically, see, when you call anything, right, you again get a this argument and an arguments list. What do I mean by that? Let's say I have a bound foo, right? I can still call it with something else. I can, let's say, if my this was object one, I can still again call this bound function with a new this, right? So that's why you have this argument. So it says that when you are calling this bound function, you'll get a this argument and arguments list. But if you notice, this argument is never going to get used. Okay, so if I call a bound function with any new this, that is never going to get used. So it's basically saying that whatever things you have stored till now, okay, so we have stored what function we want to actually call, we have stored what is the actual this we want to use, right? So we're going to ignore this whatever you sent during dot call, we're going to ignore that. And then it's saying that you have these bound arguments, right? So of course we want to merge these two things. We want to take whatever new argument was given to the bound function plus whatever was already stored inside, right? So that is what it is doing. So it's saying, let's say my args is a new list containing the same values as the list boundar. So it is basically creating a new list which contains the old value, and then after that it's going to put this new things that we have passed in, new arguments, right? So see, this again making it very clear that the order is important, right? So if I have 1 2 3 here, and now I call this with 4 5, right, then the final output that I should say that my arguments are in that order, right? 1 2 3 4 5. The order is, that's why very important when it's creating these new arguments. And then it is finally calling the actual function using this bound this and this sort of merged arguments, right? And right, so that's basically what is happening in here. It has like some definition for construct also, like so basically you can basically bind a constructor also, like a normal function or a class, right, and then try to use it as a constructor. But that is, I guess, not that much important, right? But let's think of one more thing here, right? Let's actually see why these precise definitions are important, right? So let's do one thing. I want to bind this thing. Okay, okay, it's breaking anyway. So let's say I want to bind this thing once more. Okay, so let's say if I have a bound foo already, right? What if I try to bind it once more? And again put something else, right? So we want to see that if I bind a already bound function, is that going to make any difference, right? Is it going to take the new this that I pass in here? Let's say if I do a object 3 here, when this function is this finally this foo is going to call, is it going to get this new bound value, or is it going to take the old bound value, right? And also what happens to my arguments, right? Where do they go? So if you notice here, right, it basically says that, so let's say when you are calling this bound foo, right, you are calling this second level bound function, right, which is already bound. So what it's basically saying is that call the target. So in case of bound foo2, your target is bound foo1, right? So it's going to call that target with the this that it got. So bound foo will be, it's something like doing bound foo dot call with object 3, right? And these new arguments. But you understand how bound foo is going to work, right? So bound foo is already, it's, when I do this and then I called bound foo2, right? Let me actually write it down. This is basically the same thing as, sort of the same thing as calling my bound foo, like dot call, and passing in object 3, right, plus whatever input it got, so 6 7, right? It's some similar to calling it like this, right? But my bound foo knows that whatever this was passed from the second level, it is anyway going to ignore that. So what I'm trying to basically say is that if you bind the same function multiple times, it always takes the first this value that was provided to it, right? And only the arguments that you provide, they will basically get merged. So yeah, I think, yeah,
So,
that's,
Abhas, it's a quick time check.
yeah, sure. So I think, yeah, that's mostly all about bound function. And someone said arrow function. Okay, so you can take, I don't know, like a small look maybe. Okay,
Sure.
arrow function.
Yeah, so now it's a time for question
Okay.
also. So if anyone have any question, they can raise their hand and
Yeah, yeah. So if I get some question, I'll do that, or maybe this thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. So okay. So let me actually try. Please check the questions tab. Okay. Model of my why can you learn the BNF grammar? How reusable? Why does the only initial bind work and not further? Okay, so if we actually go back, yeah, I guess this was little confusing, right? So it's like saying that if you have a first level bound function, right, and then you have a second level bound function, right? So when the second level bind function is calling the first level one, is going to do something like dot call on the first level one, but every bound function knows that whatever this I get during the call, I'm going to ignore that, right? So even if my second level gives you a new this to the first level, it's going to ignore that. It's only going to use whatever it got during the initial dot bind, right? So there is no merging or anything in case of this, which is why like only, the first bind that you use is going to be useful, but not for arguments. The arguments are going to get merged basically. Okay. So last thing, if we can cover quickly, is the arrow function. Okay. So I'm not going to go into the syntax, but huh. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to explain it in short, right? Uh, so whenever you create a function, right? Whenever you create a normal function, it has a few internal properties. Okay. So can I search for that at least? Uh, this mode, no, yeah. Ordinary object create. Okay, anyway, so your function has this basically this internal thing called, you can basically search for it later also. So it has this thing called this mode. Okay, so your this mode can be strict, non-strict, or it can be lexical. Okay, so when you create a arrow function, when you are creating this arrow function, right, it's not an exotic object like according to the spec. It's basically a ordinary function. It's sort of just like a normal function, but it's this mode is going to be lexical. Okay, and if you can again find the how the call operation works on a arrow function, what it is again going to do is it's not going to take the value of this that you are passing during call. Okay, so let's say if this is my new foo, right, and again if I call foo with any this value, right, that's going to get ignored, right? It's same like bound function, it's going to ignore that, and instead within this, if I use this dot something, right, it's going to resolve this value like a normal variable. Okay, so let me actually show you an example. Let me show you an example, right? So yeah, I guess constructor, or maybe it can be like a normal object. Okay, so if I have an object literal, right, and then I'm defining some function, and I'm writing this, right, and I'm maybe using this within this. So what this means is this: whenever you call this function, whether using object.fn or anything, it's going to ignore whatever is the value of this that you have passed till now. It is going to resolve this variable just like any other value. So for example, if I have abc equal to 1 to 3 here, right, you know how this variable is going to get resolved normal. So yeah, sorry. So in an arrow function, if I just, or in any function really, if I just use abc, right, which is defined outside any, you might say, any unbound variable, sort of any variable which is not passed in my arguments, right, if I try to use that, that will be resolved from the lexical scope, meaning like wherever you have defined this function, right. So wherever I've defined this function, the outer abc value is 1 to 3, right. So if anyone prints this abc, it will be 1 to 3. Now the thing is about arrow functions, that this that you are using here is also going to get resolved lexically, meaning this has no special meaning within arrow function, compared to a normal variable. So normal variable get resolved like this, like what is my outer abc, I'm going to use that if it is not passed in arguments, of course. And the same thing happens in case of a this. So if I am using this here, right, it's basically going to take the value of this, whatever that is outside my function, right. So what I'm trying to say is, if I do object.fn here, right, my value of this is not object, right, it's not object, it's not going to be like a normal function where this is the this, that is not going to be the case, but instead the value of this will be whatever is the lexical thing, like whatever is defined outside. So probably it's going to be like a window or whatever is outside in this case. So basically search for something called this mode. That's what controls whether it's a normal function or a arrow function. So yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. So, Abhas, I think it was a great session, what I see. So, if you have any questions, guys, please feel free to ask. We'll just be there. So, Sunny wants to share
Yeah.
something on the back end. So, Sunny, you can raise hand. I can just pull you in. Hey, Sunny, yeah, yes, you're in. So, guys, Sunny is here. Avas is here. Any questions or anything, feel free to ask. And I'm also here. If any question on the future talks, any suggestion for the future, then also those also you can ask definitely. Yeah, Sunny, over to you.
Okay, okay. So yeah, we'll discuss. Abbas, you have anything else?
No, no. Yeah, I'll stop the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
I'm sharing my screen, guys. Let me know when you see my screen. Everybody's able to see my screen, right? Yeah. Abbas, someone is asking about the mic thing. Which mic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah. That's
Abhishek is fond of your mic, so please provide the details.
it. Okay. Sure. It's called
Yeah.
what?
Let's see, let's see what is server side rendering and what is client side rendering. So most of us, like, we worked on Angular or React. Okay, so usually we see the application which is a client side rendering. We start our frameworks with the client side. So what is client side? Let's see. So for example, let's move back. So what will happen when you go for Amazon.com, right? You will hit, as soon as you hit the Amazon.com, it will hit the DNS. It will hit the DNS. What is DNS? Domain name server. It will ask for the IP. Give me the IP. Okay. So after that, browser will hit that IP and ask for the first page. So what will be the first page? First page will be the slash. First page will be the slash, which is basically index dot something, index.html. So what will happen? It will give you the page. In my case, let me show you my thing. 1 second. This is like I've created a blog. So for example, if you go in the network tab, right, as soon as I refresh it, it loads the this domain learn.devco.in. So what will happen if you see response? I got the response, a very little response. I'm not having the page. If you right click, do view page source, if you see only basic page, nothing is there, our content is not there. So what this is basically a client side rendering. I'm having an application which is having a client side rendering. What does that mean? After getting this page, it will call these links. It will hit an it will hit a network request for all the CSS part. It will hit the request for all the JS part. This is basically a client side rendering which we are following. Earlier we are following, every company is following this approach before before Angular, before React, that this is what the single page application client side. So what will happen in this case? If you go back, let me remove this. So this trick I actually forgot to tell you. So let's say this CSS file, are you seeing this, right? Who called this? Who called this CSS file? My document called this particle library, my document, the root file called it. So what you can do, just hover this network request by pressing shift. If you see this, right? If you see this, it is showing who called this. Like, by hovering on the learn.devco.in, it means all the red thing are called by learn.devco.in. If I wanted to check who called this image, so for example, I wanted to check who called this image. This image is called by .js file. If you see, I'm hovering on this. Who called this image? Image is called by main dot this js file. If I wanted to know who called this main.js, if you see who called this main.js is called by my learn.devco.in, and learn main.js is responsible for the red thing. So this is what we can get to know who is calling which file. Okay, this is basically a client side rendering. We first call the HTML page, then HTML page will call other related CSS files, JS files, and in my case it is responsive. Okay, I'm having a responsive thing. Okay, so let's move on to the Amazon.com. So what is happening in Amazon.com? They are following the server side rendering. Why server side rendering? Because server side rendering is comparatively fast. Let's see what is server side rendering. If you see this Amazon.com, right, click on it, just see a preview. If you observe, they are giving us a page. They are giving us a whole page. If you observe, right, they are giving us a whole page. What do you mean by that? What they have done, they have created a page in the server, they have cached it using reverse proxy, and they are just sending this the whole page. They are not binding any data in the front end side, they are not doing any further request. So this is what a server side rendering. If you see, in my case, you're not able to see anything in the preview. If I go back, if I click on it, if I do preview, you are not going to see anything because the page itself is not there. I'm building it, my page, in the browser. Amazon.com is building the page at server. They have cached everything, and they are just sending the whole page. And after that, reflow and repaint process is happening, and they're generating the pixel in the UI. So the question was like, why it is not responsive? Because it is not required, because we requested for the browser. If you see right now, let's go back to the network tag and see the request header. If you see the request header, right, let me zoom a little bit. If you see a request header, it is showing user agent is what the browser details. User agent is Chrome. Okay, they are saying send the pages for Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. They're saying send us a page for web browsers, not for the mobile. Let me refresh it, let me clear everything, and let me refresh now. Just observe, guys. Let me duplicate so that you guys can compare. Then we'll say another example from Flipkart. You'll get they are using the PWA. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, let me navigate to network tab, clear it, let me refresh. If you see, they have given a different page. If you see, they have given a different page. That page is not same. If you see, they have given a different page. Are you getting it? They have created a page based on the device. We have sent like, I need a device, I need a website which supports Android 6. This things, you got it, guys? So server side rendering is pretty much fast because we know which is the device. We don't need, in responsiveness, what is happening, we write the media queries. We write the media queries for mobiles, then we write the media queries for desktop. So right now, if a website is required only for mobile, then don't put your desktop code. If your website is only required for if required for browsers, don't put mobile code. So this is what they're doing. So it doesn't mean that is not responsive. Yes, they are not responsive, they are fluid. Let me explain what is fluid. So if you see in this case, one second, let me refresh it. Oh, actually, I have to remove this first. I have to let's go move back to Flipkart. Flipkart is a very good example for this. So right now, if you see network tab, we need to check they're you doing the server side rendering or what. See, these big companies are doing the server side rendering. If you see these big companies are doing the server side rendering, it means server side rendering is fast. So don't worry, they have something else. What they have done. Let's move to the mobile view. Let's see. So what they have done, they have protected. Guys, my voice is clear. Someone said you're not audible.
You are Sunny.
Okay. So what is happening? Like they're doing what they say. Like enable JavaScript. They protected the whole page, but we got the response. If somehow I have tackled this thing, we'll get the response. So let's see why it is not coming in normal. So basically this half page they are doing server side rendering, but after that if you see the scroll right, they are doing the lazy loading. So server side rendering is pretty much fast compared to client side, because you are not going to send the request again and again. You will get the page itself at the first place. Let's see if it is coming. I have stopped or something, not sure. So Amazon, let's see Amazon. So it doesn't mean Amazon is not responsive. It is responsive. We have to request for specific page. If you open amazon.com, it will give you the amazon.com according to the mobile. So if I say if it is not responsive, it is fluid. There is a term of fluid. It is this application right now, the page which I am seeing right now, they are not responsive. Like this is fluid, this is basically a fluid, this is adjusting based on the height and width. So Flipkart is a PWA, progressive web app. Okay, so progressive web app, let's see, this much you got it right. What is server side and what is client side? Because at server side they cache everything at the server level. So we have a proxy servers, we have a caching mechanism, we have a load balancer. Based on that they'll pick the page from the cache, and directly they'll give us. That's why if you see, I'm not sure this will be like visible for you. We'll see like how in the next session how to read this, like what is that.
So what we can have a dedicated session for a server-side rendering for a
Yes.
more detailed
So
study.
Flipkart is, if you see, Flipkart is like, go back. Flipkart is having a very nice thing. If I refresh, they have a very nice UI. I think in the simulator only it is working fine. So any questions? Any questions on server side rendering and all? So they are using if you see they are using service
So, Sunny,
PWA.
there is a question: is it possible to render React or Angular page from server side?
Yeah, we can use, they have a library before building it, they can use, they have a mechanism, they can use it. If you see some libraries are there, they definitely they can use it.
Yeah, React does definitely is React server-side rendering is
Correct,
there.
correct,
Angular
correct.
also possible for server-side rendering.
So yeah, I'm not in React, but yeah, I know. I'm in Google. Like almost every product is server side rendering. Every product they have their own frameworks. They are not using Angular React, so they have everything server side rendering because that is fast. They cache everything in the server level. Within a milliseconds, you will get the page. They don't need to hit another request for CSS. They don't need to hit another request for JavaScript. So they prepared. So future is like basically if you go in a big company, if you go in any big company where speed matters, they use the server side rendering. No one uses client side. So you'll get the extension, you'll get everything in these cases. Any other question regarding like the whatever I have shared, whatever
Yeah,
about?
so there are questions about the pros and cons of server and client side, but keeping time in mind, so I think I see opportunity here to have a session dedicated to server side and rendering. So definitely we'll cover more on that session.
Sure, sure.
But we already crossed the time. So if any question related to this topic, then we can have, or we'll close this topic. So what will happen? Whatever the recording, so okay, there is a server side versus PW. Yes. So those all
P-
will cover. Yeah.
so basically, PWA is you can use an application offline. So if you go, if your net is not there, you will see the page. You can perform operation. But in server side is just a process where you will get the whole build page from the server. That's it. PWA is a different thing. PWA you can use application as an offline. You can store some memory in your phone. Then later you can sync it. You will get the notification. You can store your website as an icon in your mobile app. So you can read more about the PWA.
So definitely we can have a dedicated session on those in our coming meetups. So guys, so we'll be posting our next meetup details on meetup.com. So you guys can RSVP over there. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, Avaz. It was really a great talk, and I see a lot of
Thank you.
questions. So it was really interactive. I hope you all might have liked the Airmeet platform. We did a partnership with Airmeet, and they provided us a platform to see how this kind of sessions is going on. So that's all from my end, and so you can follow our Twitter, and any questions, any you can directly post over there. You can follow me, and or you can directly reach out to me also. My details are there on meetup.com page, our page. You can submit a talk if you want to talk also in some time, or you can suggest what topic you want to hear from us in our next meetups. So thank you, Dhamini. Janardhan, I think was having some network issue. So thank you all. So have a good day. Bye bye.